Hello, everyone. My name is Jeanette Southwood. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I am the Executive Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at EngiQueers Canada, and I'm an engineer myself. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar, Thriving at Work, Practical Tools for Supporting Employee Wellbeing. As part of our commitment to incorporating Indigenous ways of being and ways of knowing into the engineering profession, I would like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. I myself am a settler on these lands. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the effect of residential schools and colonialism on Indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As we dive into today's webinar, I want to wish you all a happy Pride Month. Pride is a time to celebrate the 2S LGBTQI+ community, their accomplishments, resilience and resistances, and strength. There is still a great deal more work to be done to ensure that 2S LGBTQI+ folks feel welcomed in the profession. EngiQueers Canada is the National Association of Provincial and Territorial Engineering Regulators that license more than 330,000 members of the engineering profession across Canada. At EngiQueers Canada, we know the value that diverse perspectives bring to our engineering profession. Given our role in our communities, it is incredibly important that engineers not only reflect the communities we serve, but that we truly serve the entire community through our work, our designs, and our engineering solutions. We are happy to host this Pride Month conversation about inclusive leadership, employee well-being, authenticity, and healthy workplace cultures. And we are thrilled that our EngiQueers Canada affinity partner, TD Insurance, has offered their generous support for today's event. I'd now like to turn the virtual floor over to Sarah Moran, who will guide us through today's conversation. Sarah is a fourth-year engineering student in chemical engineering and bioengineering at McMaster University, and she is very passionate about creating a safe space for everyone to grow and learn. This year, she is serving as the president of EngiQueers Canada, a national nonprofit organization that provides visibility, advocacy, and support to 2S LGBTQI+ students in STEM programs and aims to increase acceptance within the profession. EngiQueers Canada represents over 30 engineering student groups from post-secondary institutions across the country who work hard to host events and initiatives to promote social connection and professional development. EngiQueers Canada is one of EngiQueers Canada's strategic partners. Sarah is joined in conversation today by Ting-Fai, who is Project Coordinator Energy at Pride at Work Canada. Ting holds a PhD and is a qualitative researcher with extensive experience in academic, community, and applied settings. As a scholar active in 2S LGBTQI+ studies, he has published research in field-shaping journals such as the Journal of Homosexuality, the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, and the Journal of Intercultural Studies, as well as in volumes such as the Elgar Encyclopedia of Queer Studies and the Oxford Handbook of Language and Prejudice. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jeanette. I'm excited for today's discussion. As you mentioned, my name is Sarah, and I am currently the EngiQueers Canada president for this year. Ting, do you want to tell us more about yourself and the work that you do with Pride at Work and within the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Engineers Canada for bringing us together for this conversation. My name is Ting-Fai. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently with Pride Work Canada, where I coordinate the Empowering 2S LGBTQIA+ Workers in Energy project. So that project focuses on understanding the workplace experiences of 2S LGBTQIA+ workers in the energy sector, especially in environments that are technical, field-based, trades-oriented, or traditionally male-dominated. So my broader work sits at the intersection of research, workplace inclusion, and organizational change. I'm trained as an anthropologist, so I'm really interested and have always been interested in how workplace cultures are built through everyday behaviors, through policies, leadership decisions, as well as informal norms. So I'm basically interested in how people do things and their implications for the collectives. So in the DEI space, I have, been trying to translate research and live experience into tools employers can actually use, including training, policy guidance, leadership conversations, and workplace resources. So one example is our, project guide as a result of, as an outcome of the many, many months of research we have done in the energy sector, as well as the toolkits that, you can find on our website. So for today's conversation, I am especially interested in moving beyond symbolic inclusion. So Pride matters, Pride Month matters, visibility matters, but what really matters is whether people can go to work, be safe, be respected, do their jobs well, and imagine a future for themselves in the profession.
Yes, absolutely. Um, but things have been difficult lately. We've seen growing debate and in some cases backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Especially with engineering being such a like historically exclusionary field, it can be very like intimidating and scary for students, queer people, and like new grads to try and break the the industry. How would you describe the current landscape for the 2S LGBTQIA plus employees in Canada?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the word I would use to describe the current situation, the current landscape, is contradiction. So I think the current landscape is contradictory. So on the one hand, there has really been some real progress. So more employers now have Pride ELGs or other affinity networks. They have gender inclusive policies. They have inclusive benefits that cover 2S LGBTQIA plus workers and their spouses and their families. They have pronoun practices as well as stronger language around harassment and discrimination. Many workers, especially younger ones, early career professionals, they also expect employers to take inclusion seriously. So it has been treated as something that should be done. Unlike, just a few years ago, I see real progress, not only in Canada, but also globally. But at the same time, we are also seeing backlash, fatigue, and in some cases, a retreat from visible DEI commitments, especially since early 2025. So that does not mean the need has gone away. It often means the opposite, actually. So for TUS LGBTQIA plus employees, backlash can create uncertainty. People may wonder, is it still safe to be visible here? Is it still safe for me to be myself? Will my manager back me up if something happens? Okay. Will this policy be enforced or does it only exist on paper? So these are questions TOS LGBTQIA plus workers have been asking, since last year. So I would say this is exactly the moment where employers need to be clearer, not quieter. Inclusion cannot depend on whether the broader political climate feels comfortable. Okay, that has to be embedded in safety, especially in the energy sector. Safety is very important. The well-being, psychological, physical of employees. On retention, leadership, and everyday workplace culture.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I find that, as you mentioned, safety is very important in the energy sector. It's also important in engineering too. This is something that like I'm learning as an engineering student. It's very important for everyone to feel like safe and comfortable in the workplace. To elaborate on that, why should employers care about belonging and inclusion, especially during periods of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think employers, they should care about belonging, because it's not decorative. It has real life implications to productivity, to business success, to inclusive workplaces. It affects whether people stay, whether they are willing or comfortable to speak up, whether they are comfortable reporting concerns, whether they trust leadership, whether they trust their managers, or whether they can focus on the work they were hired to do and to do it effectively. So during times of uncertainty, people look closely at what organizations protect. Okay, this is exactly what people look for. If
Mhm.
inclusion is treated as merely optional, employees notice. If harassment is minimized and disregarded, employees notice. If leaders avoid difficult conversations or remain silent, employees notice. In technical fields, including engineering and energy, this is especially important because inclusion is connected to safety culture. So during my research, with stakeholders in the energy sector, with workers, union representatives and community workers related to the sectors, um, you know, people all agree that safety is a huge issue in the energy industry. So people need to be able to raise concerns because it is a safety issue. They need to ask questions. They should be comfortable admitting mistakes without fearing retaliation. They should be able to challenge unsafe behaviors and to report harassment without any fear. So for me, belonging is not about, everybody feeling comfortable all the time. It is about building the conditions where people can contribute honestly, safely, and fully.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to have an environment where people can fully contribute. Um, as an engineering student, I've been working with a lot of different groups, and everyone has such great ideas. Everyone's very different. They've got unique perspectives, and it's important for all of these perspectives to be heard, um, in order to like communicate efficiently, and just do the job well. It's a part of engineering, and I find this is very important to like put emphasis on. Employers need to protect their workers. Um, and as someone who is looking for a co-op soon, um, I'm hoping to get like a 16-month co-op. So that's going to be a long time that I'm at a company for. And I'm nervous about being able to like be myself, how safe I'm going to feel in the company, and how I can be like authentically me. What does authenticity look like in professional settings and why does it matter for well-being?
Well, this is a great question and a very important one. So authenticity does not mean bringing every part of your private life into work. It means not having to spend constant energy hiding, translating, explaining, editing, or protecting yourself. So for a 2S LGBTQIA plus employee, authenticity might look very ordinary, such as being able to mention a partner, a same-sex partner, um, without having to calculate the risk, for example.
Mhm.
Okay. Having your name and pronouns respected, having people taking your names and pronouns seriously. Not having to laugh along with jokes that target people um, like you, like us, people who are queer, or people who are of other marginalized backgrounds. Being able to use the washrooms or change room without anxiety, especially for trans and non-binary employees. Being able to participate in workplace social life without having to pretend to be someone who is not you. It matters for well-being because concealment is work and it is really, really tiring. So monitoring yourself all day is work. Deciding when to correct someone, when to stay silent, when to close, when to avoid a conversation, all takes energy. Okay? And that energy is then taken away from innovation, from creativity, from collaboration, from problem solving, and professional growth. So it is actually not beneficial to business development and productivity. So employers should imagine authenticity as an individual choice. So people can share if they want to. But the deeper question is whether the organization has created conditions, the embeddedness, the systems, where sharing or not sharing is genuinely safe, and whether QS LGBTQIA plus employees and leaders are empowered to make that decision themselves.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's very important for the company to have created that like conditions themselves. I'm very lucky right now to be on co-op in a lab, and everyone's great. Everyone's like very sweet, and it's very easy being myself there. Um, and I like find my well-being's great right now. Um, but are there any unique well-being considerations for 2S LGBTQIA plus employees that employers should better understand?
Yes, absolutely. So, yes. So, one key consideration is that towards LGBTQIA plus employees often face stresses that are not always visible to employers. Okay. So, that can be the stress of disclosure, as we just, talk about. Should I come out? Who can I come out to? Will it affect how I am perceived? Will people treat me differently? So that can be the stress of also misgendering or being repeatedly corrected into the wrong category. So that can be the stress of being the only queer or trans person on the team. There can also be the cumulative effect of jokes, casual comments, exclusion from informal networks, or uncertainty about whether policies will actually protect you. So these things, even though they might look very small, they might look very trivial to the eyes of heteronormative leaders, but they do accumulate and they do have, serious consequences. So intersectionality matters here. As a queer racialized person, I cannot emphasize that enough. So, for example, a white gay man in a corporate office, a trans woman in a field-based role, a two-spirit worker in a remote job site, and a queer newcomer, racialized engineers may all experience the workplace very, very differently. So inclusion cannot be one size fits all. The other thing employers need to understand is that well-being is not just about individual resilience. Okay, so don't, you know, uh, allocate a responsibility to individuals. You can offer wellness apps or mental health benefits, but if the culture is hostile, isolating, or dismissive, the root problem remains. So it's really culture, not individuals, that I would want to emphasize.
Hmm. Yeah, the culture is very important. Individual resilience is like leads to exhaustion, and it's not a way to promote well-being. Um, yeah, thank you. From your work with employers across Canada, what are some of the most common barriers that still impact the well-being and inclusion of 2S LGBTQIA plus employees?
Well, I think there are too many of them. Um, but that's
Absolutely.
just your main. But I would name five. I would name five common barriers that are, um, you know, uh, that we must really focus on at the current time. So first, there is the gap between policy and practice. Many organizations have good language and policy, but employees do not always trust that the policy will be enforced. So it is really down to managers and leaders to act on it, to not stay silent when they witness, bullying, for example, or they witness any other forms of discrimination. They should really speak up and to speak on behalf of their employees. And that is very important because by speaking up, you demonstrate the linkage between policy and practice. You demonstrate that policy is not just a document, that you really care about it, and the company really care about it. So that second, there is the discomfort among managers Okay, as we have also discussed, we are in a very, very interesting time that we see backlash against DEI, like all the time. Um, so some leaders are actually very, very supportive in principle, but they are unsure what to say, how to intervene, or how to respond when harm happens. Some of them are simply not trained to deal with difficult conversations. So we should really take learning seriously, I would say,
Mhm.
to get yourself up to date with, the climate and to get yourself up to date with, contemporary workplace practices and principles with regards to respect, safety, and well-being. So third, there are informal cultural norms, jokes, assumptions, or ideas about what a good fit looks like. So these are often harder to change than formal policies because these are perceptions. They are mostly built upon stereotypes, from mainstream culture, from popular culture that have no scientific grounding, what, a perfect employee looks like, for example. And this is why we should be really aware of the assumptions we make. It's okay
Mhm.
to make mistakes, but it's really important to be able to contextualize. So, I mean, we are all human beings, we are all shaped by external influences, but we should really try to be as fair as possible. And we need to, I want to emphasize again, we need to constantly get ourselves updated with resources and to educate ourselves and to try to understand the experiences of people who are not similar to us. So fourth, there's underreporting. So I have observed that a lot in the research. So many employees do not report harassment or discrimination because they fear being labeled as difficult. It's always difficult, it's always scary to stand out, right? Being the
Mhm.
only person who is different and who is being the only person who speaks too much, especially if you are, a trans person or if you are, a racialized person, for example, because they might worry that, speaking up, standing out can harm their career. So worst case, or they might simply, think that, there's no use, that they wouldn't get meaningful responses. This is
Mhm.
why, like HR, for example, they should really, develop these reporting channels seriously. They should take complaints seriously, respond efficiently. So really need to demonstrate. So these kind of actions and demonstration can really make the difference and really again bridge the gap between policy and practice. And fifth, there's really the material barriers, and I have heard that a lot from especially trans and non-binary employees, like washrooms, inclusive washrooms, benefits, inclusive benefits, administrative systems, names, pronouns, and documentations. So these are things that should really be in place, but unfortunately, too many workplaces they are not. So, and that is why practical inclusion has to go beyond awareness and to, be able to articulate, linkages between policy practices, cultural norms, reporting channels, and also material barriers. Awareness is, of course, useful, like what we are doing now, to, bring that to the surface and to, have people confront, the realities, and the struggles of many people in Canada. But employees need system, they need accountability, and managers really need to know how to act.
Yes, absolutely. There's no good in having these policies and things in place if it's not going to be actually actively acted upon. Learning is important. We should all be learning and educating ourselves all the time, but it's also important to put what we've learned into actual practice. So, Pride at Work created a resource empowering 2S LGBTQIA plus workers in energy. Tell us a bit about this report. Are there cultural norms or industry dynamics that create unique challenges for 2S LGBTQIA plus employees in technical fields?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. So the Empowering TOS LGBTQIA plus workers in energy project was developed to better understand the experience of towards LGBTQIA+ workers in Canada's energy sector and to provide practical guidance for employers. I am very, very proud to have conducted the research and to have, published the guide in the toolkits that influence industry practices. So what makes the resource important is that it centers workers' experience. So we did everything qualitatively. Okay, so we don't show you numbers. We don't, tell you that, being inclusive can lead to business success, through numbers, how many percent. We don't do that. So it's really qualitative. We hear people's stories. We document their stories. We make sense of them. We identify patterns, and we generate recommendations. So we hear the stories from workers, especially those from field-based and trades operational roles, because these voices had previously been marginalized, in the industry as well as in mainstream DEI discourses. Because a lot of DEI work in Canada and globally is designed with work office environments in mind. But in energy, in engineering, and related technical fields, many people work in field-based operational and contractor-heavy settings, okay? Sometimes remote settings. So this changes the culture and the risk. And this is what we cannot emphasize enough the importance. So many workplaces are not only male-dominated structurally, but also shaped by cultural norms of toughness, silence, endurance, and the need of fitting in. And that can make it really, really hard for people to speak up about harassment, about bullying, about their mental health, or about any forms of exclusion they have experienced. The report also pushes us to connect inclusion with safety. Again, this connection is very important. Inclusion and safety, they are um, to a certain extent the same thing. Harassment, like outing, washroom exclusion, fear of reporting are not just HR concerns. They affect whether people feel safe, whether they trust their team, whether they can do their jobs well. So one of the key messages is inclusion in energy and engineering cannot be separated from safety culture. And if you talk to anybody who works in energy, they would tell you that safety is taken very, very seriously and it's already embedded in the culture. So the next question to us is how can we better embed inclusion in existing safety policies and protocols and practices?
Mhm. Absolutely. I find safety and inclusion cannot be separated, as you mentioned. Um, in order for people to do their jobs well, they must feel safe and feel comfortable, um, and trust their team. It's important for them to do their job properly. Um, so employers really should put emphasis on this. Um, and I know employers might not know the proper way to do these things. Hopefully, that's why you might be joining a webinar like this. But Ting, what are some practical tools, programs, and policies that you've seen make a real difference in creating healthier workplace cultures?
Okay, there are so many ways to do it, and context really matter. But for the purpose of this conversation, I would really want to highlight three levels: infrastructure, leadership, and everyday culture. So at the infrastructure level, employers need clear anti-harassment policies, and they need to be updated like constantly. Um, Gender inclusive washrooms, inclusive benefits, transition support for trans employees, for example, proper names and pronouns in systems. Okay, so these are things that can be, the guiding principles basically through
Mhm.
policy implementation that is effectively implemented at the company level that I'm sure a lot of companies are already doing. So at the leadership level, for example, managers and supervisors need guidance. It's not enough to say, be an ally. Everybody can say that. But allyship is really about action. Okay. Are you willing to use your power to leverage for other people who are marginalized and different from you? Are you willing to use your voice to speak up on behalf of others. This is what allyship should look like. It's not just, expressing support in private. It's really about doing your part to use the power you have to leverage for others. So supervisors need to know how to like interrupt harmful jokes, for example,
Mhm.
how to respond to a disclosure, how to receive a complaint and respond to a complaint, and how to avoid putting the burden back on the person who has been harmed. Okay. And at the everyday culture level, small repeated practices matter, like toolbox talks, for example, safety briefings that have been in place. So why don't we just integrate elements like safety, into these existing practices, respect, inclusion, and like field-based champions, visible allyship, employees affinity groups, can actually make inclusion part of normal workplace life rather than something that appears only during Pride Month. So the best tools I would say are practical. They are repeated. They can be implemented easily. Implemented. They can be accountable. They can be tracked. They can be easily identified, and they can be monitored. Okay, so not one training. Once every few years. So so not like a training session during Pride Month, but something that can be
Mhm.
repeatedly done all year round. So the outcome would be a culture where expectations are clear and reinforced.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. As I mentioned, I think learning is very important. So, like, these training sessions are great, but as you mentioned, once every few years is not going to be very helpful. Um, it's actually got to be actively implemented into the workplaces. Um, and I hope that a lot of you on this call are wanting to better support 2S LGBTQI plus employees. So, Ting, what advice would you give to leaders who want to support their employees but are navigating resistance, uncertainty, or competing pressures within their organizations?
Yes, that's a really great question. So my advice would be to start from your role as a leader, not from your fear of saying the perfect thing. So what is leadership? So, what a good leader looks like. So in my opinion, I don't think leaders need to know everything about every identity. Okay. The world is constantly changing and we cannot, know everything, like realistically speaking. But leaders do need to be clear about workplace expectations. There are some fundamental ideas, such as respect, safety, dignity, and fairness. So those are not controversial values. Those are human rights issues.
Mhm.
And they are basic conditions for people to work well together. When there is resistance, I would encourage leaders not to frame inclusion as a special favor for one group. So frame it as part of building a healthy, safe, high-functioning workplace. Clear content expectations help everybody, and psychological safety helps everybody. And at the same time, leaders should not dilute the issue so much that you as LGBTQIA plus people disappear from the conversation. Okay, so on the other hand, universal benefits and targeting attention can coexist at the same time. Okay. And finally, leaders should be willing to act before there is a crisis. If the first time you talk about like queer trans inclusion is after harm has occurred, you are already behind. Okay, so this is how trust is built. You need to do it quickly, respond quickly, or
Mhm.
sometimes before the harm is done. Okay, so after the harm is done, it is really just crisis management, and trust can erode very, very quickly. So in order to build trust, um, the timing it's very important, I would say. And the only way to ensure that is to be constantly communicating and understanding your needs, the needs of your employees, I would say.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree that the leaders should definitely be willing to act even before. Yeah, this needs to be implemented into the workplace so people feel safe, they feel willing to do the work, and like they're going to be valued in the company. So, for those leaders who genuinely want to be supportive but are unsure of where to begin, what would some practical first steps that they could take be?
Well, I would suggest three first steps. So first, listen to what employees are already telling you, including through engagement surveys, exit interviews, ELGs, um, complaints, and informal feedback. Do not assume silence means everything is fine. Okay, sometimes I think most times silence means fear. Okay, and second, audit the basics. Do people have access to safe washrooms? Do systems always correct names or pronouns? Do benefits include US LGBTQIA plus needs? What their needs are? Do harassment policies explicitly covers sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression? And do people know how to report concerns? Are there formalized channels in place for people to have access to when they have concerns? Third, we need to equip managers. Managers are often the point where inclusion either becomes real or breaks down. So give them concrete scenarios, language, and expectations. Bring in people from the community to talk about, their experiences and their struggles. Let them talk about, things that, heteronormative leaders are unable to see. I think those are, really, really important. So a useful starting point is to implement, these practical actions sooner rather than later. Okay, you know, we are talking about this because we are in June, Pride Month. Uh, but we should be, really, implementing, these steps like all the time, sooner rather than
Yeah.
later. So, for example, improve reporting pathways, you can start on one thing, improve reporting pathways or add inclusion scenarios to safety talks, train supervisors to interrupt microaggression and identity-based harassment. It doesn't have to be big. There are small steps that, you can take right now, actually. Just start with something and then build upon it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. We're going to move into the Q&A. We have a Q&A function for folks that have any questions. There is one we have submitted already. Oh, okay. As inclusion or exclusion can come in many ways, what are workplace traditions or norms that might seem neutral on the surface, but can actually make individuals feel excluded?
Well, I think there are just so many of them, but I think like uh if I have to think of one to talk about, I would say it's the assumptions about one's family configurations, for example. Like not using neutral language when you are referring to like gender neutral language when you're referring to your spouses of your colleagues if you do not know their gender. So these kind of assumptions, they seem very, very neutral, in mainstream context, in everyday context, because, we have been brought up to kind of assume that if your colleague is a man, then, the spouse of your colleague would be a woman. So these are like popular assumptions
Mhm.
that influence how we think about other people's family, for example. But these are only assumptions. So they seem very neutral. They seem very friendly. On the surface,
Mhm.
they can actually make individuals feel excluded because the moment you pose these questions without using gender neutral language, you put the other person in the position to I don't know to worry about talking about it, to lie
Yeah.
about it, to play along.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I think that this is like the first example that came to my mind, but there are just so many of them. So one simple rule, one simple principle I would say is to always ask for more information. Do not assume. and be careful about language.
Mhm. Yeah, these assumptions and these little like bits of language we use, they might seem harmless, but yeah, I've experienced it myself where someone will say something and now I am not sure if I can fully be myself. So I end up usually just trying to avoid the situation. And that's no way to, create a safe and inclusive company for people.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question is, aside from doing the right thing, does your research show quantified benefits of creating and protecting safe workplaces? Like, have you seen these practice policies result in higher success during recruitments or improved innovation KPIs?
Okay, so the short answer is no, because our research is qualitative and we really center the workers' experiences and struggles for us to understand more about, the energy sector through the perspectives of TS LGBTQIA plus workers. So we did not, do any quantitative analysis, but what I would hope is to, use the research we have conducted as the starting point, because there are recommendations based on the research evidence that, things that we could do to change the system. So I would see that as, I would see those recommendations as a starting point, for us to start making difference and start tracking. And of course, it will take some time for, the data to emerge, for pattern to emerge. But I think, these things really come after. The first thing we should do is to listen to the stories of people, to understand the situations from the perspective of the people who have been excluded, who have been marginalized, whose voices had not previously been heard, and to, do the right things and to make changes to the system so that we can, start tracking and see whether that makes the difference. I'm sure that it makes a difference. Yeah, but that's my answer to you. And but there is a lot of quantitative data, especially that related to prediction about future of employment in the energy sector. So there is like a projected labor shortage, for example, according to many surveys. Um, so I also see my research as, something responding to those projections. If, there's a predicted labor shortage, what can we do, to attract talent, to attract people, younger people to enter, the sector? Okay. Are we going to um, stick to the status quo? Are we going to do more and to be more inclusive in our hiring practices, in the apprenticeship model, in education?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really like your points. We've got another question. Working in the Maritimes, there are many with evolved and inclusive attitudes, but still some employers that have very outdated perspectives. Do you have any tips for navigating like small town attitude when you need employment to still pay the bills?
Yeah. Okay, let me look at the questions.
Mhm. You can see them. Okay.
So okay, I think context really matter. So, as I said, mainstream DEI policies, they are built upon the experiences of office environments. And this is why sometimes, if you ask, in a office setting, it's good to be visible, it's good to be celebrating queer and trans inclusion. Visibility means success in a lot of contexts. But if you do that in a small town, I don't know, like in a remote workplace setting, it can be very harmful. It can be really provocative, to people in that context, and it can be really unsafe, as of observing the research. So I cannot offer you a concrete solution. I don't think anybody could. But what is very important is to understand, the dynamics and the norms of that particular workplace, of that particular context, and to devise strategies from there. Like, so cultural norms really matter, right? So I have one interviewee, so a trans woman interviewee working in a remote job site. And she told me that her survival strategy was to talk about things that her male coworkers like, like cars. She's very used to, those topics as she was really into, trucks and cars and all that. Not saying that, people should do that, but there are so this is like mainly like her survival strategies to fit in, and she managed to survive. But it happens at the individual levels, and there's a lot to be done at the level of policy and at the level of cultural change. And so we need to know the dynamics, like if in that particular context, hierarchies work in a particular kind of way, then we should, identify, who is the person of influence, and we, try to ask that person to, set examples, for example, uh, you know, people who can influence the workplace dynamics and environment to do the right thing on behalf of people who are marginalized, for example. So context really matter, and there's no one solution that fits all, and it's really important to listen to not only the difficulties people experience, but also to uh, the dynamics of the workforce, until to understand where the influences come from and to devise strategies from there.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question. What are your thoughts on the importance of engineering organization or regulators participating in visible acts of support for diversity, such as like participating in pride parades?
Well, as I said, I think it's always good to, have these kind of rituals for celebration. We all need that.
Mhm.
We all need that visibility. It's a great opportunity to raise awareness. You know, and we all need it. It's definitely
Mhm.
important, and it's great opportunity, of course. But as I said, this is really, really the minimum. You know, people really need to, um, you know, so Pride Parade, it's something that, can raise awareness, but there are other things that need to be done on the day-to-day basis, for example. So it's definitely important, but there are other things. So, but it is only, the surface level
Mhm.
of importance, and there are like other things that, we need to focus on, that are systematic, that are cultural, that are like targeted, and that listens. And yeah. What is do you have any thoughts, Sarah?
Yes, I was actually gonna say I like really like the idea of like engineering organizations or regulars like actively participating in pride and things like that. Like especially as someone going into the workforce, that's something that I'd really love to see from a company that I potentially want to work at. Although, as you emphasized, and I absolutely agree with, that's like not everything that they should be doing. They need to actively implement like diversity and equity problems, equity like principles directly into the workplace, into the community and the environment. But that is a great like starting point, and a way to show that they are trying. Hopefully, okay. Um, I don't believe we have any more questions. Um, so we'll move on. Just gonna give it a second for anyone. Okay. We'll move on and wrap it up. Um, what gives you hope right now when it comes to advancing inclusion and belonging in workplaces across Canada?
Well, I think what gives me hope is that many workers are no longer willing to compromise. They're no longer willing to separate dignity from work. Like younger workers, not only younger workers, but like workers of all ages, but especially younger workers, students, early career professionals, and many established professionals as well are asking better questions. They're not asking not only can I get a job here, but can I build a life here? Can I be respected here? Can I grow here? Can people like me thrive here? Okay, so people are looking long term increasingly, which is great, which is great. And I also find hope in the fact that many employers are moving from abstract statements to practical questions. They're asking, how do we design better reporting systems? How do we support supervisors? How do we make field sites safer? How do we make inclusion relevant to safety, retention, and leadership? Okay. And I find hope in workers themselves. The energy project is built on workers' voices, as I said. Even when people describe harm, they also describe care, allyship, humor, resilience, and the possibility of better workplaces. So that tells me this work is not only about naming what is wrong, but it's really about building what's possible. So that's the productive dimension that I am hopeful for.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. So, if every attendee left today committed to taking one meaningful action in their workplace or community, what would you hope that action would be?
So I would hope every attendee today, as I said, like choose one place where they have influence and makes inclusion more concrete there. So start um from something, regardless how small it is, take the first step. So for senior leader, for example, that might mean reviewing harassment and reporting systems. For manager, it might mean learning how to intervene when a harmful joke or comment happens. For an HR or safety professional, it might mean integrating psychological safety and identity-based harassment into safety training. Okay. For an ally, it might mean speaking up in the moment rather than privately expressing support afterward. For student or early career engineer, it might mean helping build a culture when people do not have to choose between professionalism and authenticity. So the action does not have to be huge. It can be really, really small, but it should be specific, visible, and follow through. So my final message would be, do not wait until someone is harmed to decide what kind of workplace you want to be part of. Build the conditions for people to thrive now.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. As a student, I am like absolutely trying to build a better culture. And I really truly hope that employers and managers, supervisors, they're all doing the same, because this is truly important. You talked a lot about safety. It's really important for safety and just getting work done efficiently. Um, so thank you, Ting, for all of your expertise. I'm going to pass it back to Engineers Canada for our closing remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. On behalf of Engineers Canada, I'd like to thank Sarah and Ting-Fai for joining us today and for sharing your expertise, your experience, your perspectives. This has been a very valuable discussion as we mark Pride Month and continue working towards a more inclusive engineering profession. I'd like to also thank TD Insurance for the support of today's webinar and the sponsorship of our 30 by 30 conference, which took place last month and was very successful. They are a value partner, having served engineers across Canada for more than 50 years through preferred insurance programs, and we appreciate their ongoing commitment to advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion both within their business and alongside our work. And thank you most importantly to our audience for joining us, for celebrating Pride, for your questions, and for your commitment to making engineering profession a more inclusive for everyone. As the national voice of the profession, promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion is central to Engineers Canada's purpose and remains a key strategic priority. Conversations like this today help us all to reflect on how we can contribute to a more inclusive profession. So again, thank you, Sarah, Ting-Fai, and to EngiQueers Canada and Pride at Work. And thank you to our audience and happy Pride.